The first thing I noticed when I walked into the living room wasn't that my wife's shoes were missing from the hallway. It was the piano. One key, middle C, was still pressed halfway down, as if someone had just been sitting there, playing, and left in a hurry. There was a half-finished glass of wine on top, beads of condensation sliding down like sweat. A scarf I didn't recognize was draped over the bench, smelling faintly of her perfume, and something else I couldn't place. I should have called her. I should have demanded answers. Instead, I stood there, staring at that single pressed key, feeling like it was holding back the start of a song I didn't want to hear. By the time I found the note she'd left in the kitchen, the one telling me she'd decided to stay at her ex's after the party, I already knew this wasn't just about a late night or a stupid argument. This was a move, a deliberate one. And as I poured the rest of that wine down the sink, I realized I wasn't going to wait for her to come home and explain. I was going to make sure the silence she'd left me with was nothing compared to what she'd feel when she walked back through that door. I didn't touch the piano key. I just kept staring at it, like maybe if I waited long enough, the person who pressed it would come back and finish the song. But the longer I stood there, the more I realized the silence was saying more than she ever would. It wasn't an accident that it was left like that, half a note hanging in the air without a sound. It was a message. I poured the rest of the wine into the sink, and as the red swirled away, I noticed something I had missed before, a faint lipstick stain on the rim of the glass. It wasn't the shade Delilah wore. This one was deeper, almost burgundy, and she hated dark lipstick. That meant someone else had been here, in our living room, on our piano bench, drinking wine while I was upstairs asleep. I felt my throat tighten as I walked toward the kitchen counter. That's when I saw the note. Crumpled like she'd torn it from a notepad in a rush, and the handwriting was her usual messy scrawl. Stayed at Elias's after the party. Don't overthink it. Overthink it. My mind was already racing so fast it felt like it was trying to outrun the truth. Elias wasn't just an ex. He was the one guy she always insisted was harmless, the one she kept in casual conversation like it meant nothing. But she'd stayed there. Overnight. After a party I wasn't invited to. I opened the door to the small storage closet in the hallway, not even sure why, and that's when I saw the box. The one I hadn't looked inside for over a year. Inside were the things I'd told myself I'd never need again. And as I pulled them out, I realized I finally had a way to turn her "don't overthink it" into something she would never forget. When she came home, the game would change. And this time, I wouldn't be the one left standing in the silence. It was heavier than I remembered. A dull, rectangular weight that felt almost alive in my hands as I pulled it from the back of the closet. Dust clung to the lid like it had been guarding the contents from daylight, and for a moment, I just stood there staring at it, asking myself if I was ready to see what was inside. I'd packed this box away over a year ago, swearing to myself that it would never come back into my life. It belonged to a different version of me, one who didn't think twice about doing things that crossed lines. The lid gave way with a tired sigh, and the smell hit me first, faint cedar from the old wood lining, mixed with something metallic. Inside were pieces of a life I'd buried, a stack of photographs no one else had seen, an envelope of receipts that could ruin someone's career, and an old key wrapped in black cloth. The photographs alone. Well, let's just say they were the kind of thing that could pull the rug out from under more than one person's reputation, not just Delilah's. I sat on the floor, sifting through them, my mind churning. Every image, every scrap of paper was a reminder that sometimes the quiet ones, the so-called harmless ones, were sitting on their own little stockpiles of chaos. I thought about Elias, about how smug he'd probably looked when she walked into his apartment last night. I thought about Delilah's casual little note, like she was tossing me a breadcrumb of disrespect to see if I'd follow it. By the time I closed the box, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I wouldn't confront her with yelling or accusations. No, I'd let her walk straight into a scene she couldn't explain her way out of. And the moment she stepped through that door, she'd realize her revenge had just sparked something far more dangerous than she could have imagined. The apartment felt different once I decided what I was going to do. Not just quieter, heavier. Like every object in the room was aware of what was about to happen. I carried the box to the center of the living room and laid its contents out one by one on the coffee table, careful with each piece. I wasn't rushing. No, this had to be meticulous. The photographs went in a neat spread, the receipts stacked in order by date, the old key placed right in the middle like a centerpiece. I opened the curtains just enough to let the pale morning light fall across everything. It gave the table an almost forensic look, like something out of a police evidence room. I wanted her to see it all in one glance the moment she stepped through the door. No explanations, no introductions, just the raw truth of what I'd been holding on to. But it wasn't just about confronting her with the past. I wanted her to feel the same creeping sense of exposure I felt when I saw that lipstick mark on the wine glass. So I went further. I printed out a still image from the doorbell camera, her leaving last night, arm looped through Elias's, his face tilted toward hers in a way that made my chest feel like it was shrinking. I put that photo on top of the pile, angled slightly, so it would be the first thing she'd see. I sat down in the armchair across from the table and imagined her walking in. Would she go pale? Would she laugh it off? Or would she finally realize that I wasn't the man she thought she could casually push aside without consequences? The sound of my phone buzzing broke the quiet. A text from her, heading home soon. Don't start with me. I put the phone face down without replying. Let her think I was waiting like the same old husband she'd grown used to underestimating. By the time she walked in, she'd learned the silence she'd left me with was just the start, and I'd mastered it better than she ever could. The sound of her key in the lock was sharper than I remembered, each metallic click carrying the weight of whatever she thought she was walking back into. I didn't move from my chair. I sat still, one leg crossed over the other, hands resting on the armrest like I was waiting for a meeting to start. The door opened slowly, almost cautiously, and then she stepped in, squinting against the strip of daylight spilling through the half-open curtains. Her eyes went straight to the table. I watched her freeze, her hand still gripping the doorknob. The photographs, the receipts, the old key, all spread out like the pieces of a puzzle she'd never wanted to solve. Her gaze caught on the doorbell camera still shot, that single frame where Elias's head was tilted toward her, and I could see the moment she registered what it was. She didn't touch anything. She didn't even set her bag down. "You've been busy," she said finally, but there was no humor in her voice. Just a low, guarded tone, the kind you use when you know the other person holds all the cards. "I had time," I replied. "You gave me the night." She stepped further into the room, her heels clicking against the hardwood like a metronome counting down. I noticed the faint tremor in her hands, the way her eyes kept darting between the table and my face, as if trying to decide which one posed the bigger threat. For the first time in years, she didn't look like she was in control of the conversation. "What is this supposed to be?" she asked, her voice tightening. I leaned forward just slightly, enough for the chair to creak. "Evidence," I said, "and a reminder that you're not the only one who can decide how this story goes." For a long moment, she said nothing. The apartment felt even smaller than usual, like the walls were leaning in, waiting to hear the rest. And I wasn't about to rush. Not yet. The real sting was still coming, and when it did, she wouldn't have the faintest idea how to stop it. She stood there like someone had just walked into her office mid-meeting and started rifling through her desk drawers, all tight shoulders and controlled breathing. I let the silence stretch, just long enough for her to feel the weight of it. Then I leaned back and gestured toward the key in the center of the table. "Do you recognize it?" I asked. She gave it one quick glance before looking away. "No," she said too fast. "That's strange," I replied, almost casually, "because I've seen you use it before. 2 years ago. You kept it on your keychain until the day after you met Elias for coffee. Then it disappeared, and I found it again last week, right where you thought I'd never look." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She wasn't looking at me anymore, just at the coffee table like it was a crime scene she wanted to deny ever existed. "You think this is about you and him," I continued, my voice low but steady. "But it's not. This is about what that key unlocks. And who else has been using it?" She blinked, her composure cracking for the first time. "What are you talking about?" I slid one of the envelopes toward her. Inside were the photographs, not of her, not of Elias, but of someone she knew very well. Her boss, a man who'd built his reputation on being untouchable. The photos weren't scandalous in the obvious way, but they were damning enough to make anyone sweat. Meetings in places he shouldn't have been, with people he swore he didn't know, handling documents no one was supposed to see. "I didn't take these," I said, "but I know who did. And I know you were the one who got them into the right hands. Or should I say, Elias did, through you." She shook her head, but it wasn't denial. It was the kind of shake you give when you realize the ground beneath your feet isn't what you thought it was. She looked smaller now, her confidence draining in front of me. "You set this up," she said finally, her voice trembling. "No," I said, leaning forward again. "You set this up the moment you walked out last night. I'm just finishing what you started." And as her phone began to buzz in her bag, again and again, like someone was desperate to reach her, I knew we were only a step away from the part where she'd finally understand what it meant to be cornered. The buzzing kept going, a frantic vibration against the leather of her bag that filled the room more than any ringtone could have. She didn't move to answer it at first, just stood there frozen, eyes flicking between the table and me like she was deciding which danger to deal with first. By the fifth buzz, I nodded toward the bag. "You might want to get that. Could be important." She hesitated, then finally pulled the phone out. The name on the screen made her lips part just slightly. Not Elias, not a friend, but the kind of contact you don't save unless you have a reason to hide it. I knew the name, and so did she. I'd seen it in the photographs, written on a manila folder she once claimed was just work stuff. She swiped to answer, but didn't speak, just listened. I could hear a man's voice on the other end, sharp and low, though I couldn't make out the words. Her knuckles whitened around the phone, and she turned slightly, as if that could block me from hearing what was being said. But I didn't need to hear it. I could see the way her shoulders tightened with every sentence, could see her eyes dart toward the box on the table. She wasn't just nervous, she was cornered. When she hung up, she didn't put the phone down. She kept it in her hand, like it might shield her from what was coming next. "That was work," she said, but her voice didn't have the firmness to sell it. "No," I replied calmly. "That was him trying to figure out how much I know. And right now, I'd say he's very, very concerned." She looked at me with something new, not anger, not even guilt, but calculation. I'd seen that look before when she was deciding whether to bluff her way through a situation or admit defeat. The problem for her was that this time, I had every card she thought was still in her pocket. "This isn't just about you cheating," I continued. "It's about you walking straight into someone else's war. And I'm wondering if you even realize how deep you are in it." Her jaw tightened. "And what? You're just going to blow it all up?" I leaned back in my chair. "No, I'm going to let you decide how it ends. But you've got about 30 seconds to start talking before I start making calls of my own." The clock was ticking, and I could see in her eyes she knew it. Her eyes darted between me and the phone in her hand, and for a moment I thought she might actually call my bluff. But then something shifted. She set the phone down slowly, like she was defusing her own bomb, and stepped closer to the table. Her gaze moved over the photographs, the receipts, the still image of her with Elias, and I saw something I hadn't expected to see in days. Not guilt, not defiance, but relief. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "I didn't want to be part of this. I thought I could help someone, but it got out of hand. Elias wasn't supposed to." She stopped herself, shaking her head. "I just wanted out." I didn't speak. I let her keep talking, because I could see this was the first time she wasn't trying to control the narrative. "That key," she said, nodding toward the centerpiece on the table. "It opens a storage unit. Not mine. His. I gave it back to him months ago. I have no idea why you found it here." Which meant Elias had either planted it, or someone else had. Either way, it didn't matter as much as the fact that she wasn't fighting me anymore. The wall between us had cracked, and the truth was starting to come through. "I don't care about him," she continued, her voice firmer now. "I care about fixing this. And us, before it's too late." For the first time since that note in the kitchen, I let myself breathe. I reached forward, slid the photographs and receipts back into the box, and closed the lid. "Then we end it," I said. "Completely. No more contact, no more secrets. We get rid of this, and we start clean." She nodded without hesitation. I don't know if it was because she truly meant it or because she was just desperate to make the noise stop, but either way, it was the first step forward we'd taken in months. That afternoon, we drove together to a quiet field miles outside the city. We burned everything in that box, every photograph, every scrap of paper, even the key, until there was nothing left but a small pile of ash in the wind. And for the first time in a long time, we drove home in silence that didn't feel heavy. It felt like the start of something lighter. Maybe we'd still have to rebuild trust brick by brick. Maybe we'd never go back to the way we were. But as the city skyline came into view, I realized I wasn't thinking about Elias anymore. I was thinking about us. And that was enough.